Hey everyone, it's Grandmaster Ben Feingold with our lecture series, Great Players of the Past, Paul Keres. Some say carries, like he carries the chess pieces, although he doesn't do that anymore. And the truth hurts. He's considered by many the greatest or the second greatest player never to become world champion. And we'll discuss that in the lecture. In fact, more of the lecture is going to be on Keres than actually looking at his games. But we are going to look at his games, but I want to talk about him more than I usually do. Want to thank Casey, who's our sponsor. He wanted us to use their first name. And Paul Keres, as you can see from the Wikipedia article, first of all, the only thing that matters is how long your Wikipedia article is. Then you know what you've done. Although, since usually it's longer after you die, and the truth hurts. So, Paul Keres was born in 1916 in what is now Estonia, and he died in 1975. Very young, 59. Pretty young to die, but the truth hurts. Okay? And he has some funny nicknames like Paul II, the Eternal Second, the Crown Prince of Chess, because he was always second. He was never the world champion, even when he was probably the best player in the world. And unlike a lot of top players, he kept his strength for quite a long time. So I would say between 1937 and 1967, he was top 10 in the world. So for a long time, he died quite young. He was still playing and winning tournaments when he died. In fact, a lot of people think he died in Vancouver because he played in Vancouver and he died the next day, but he was already back in Finland, actually. He was going back home and he had landed in Finland and he died there, like a day or two after his last tournament, which he won. So, man, the truth hurts. Some of my dad's friends and my dad, like Wes Berger, they've actually played Keres either over the board or in simultaneous exhibition in the 60s and early 70s. So they've actually seen him in person. I, of course, never got the chance because I was learning how the pieces move when he passed away. Not only am I doing this lecture because Casey is our sponsor, but Paul Keres did something only two other people have done. He beat 9 world champions. Okay, that's not easy to do. In fact, playing 9 world champions is not easy to do. But he beat 9 of them. Only 2 other people have ever done that. Victor Korchnoi, who obviously played, for quite a long time, and Alexander Belyavsky. And the only thing I know about Alexander Belyavsky, except that he crushed me once in California, man, he crushed me good, is he was at the St. Louis Chess Club, and the front desk is like, "Can we help you? Get out of here. Get out of here, old man." And he was like, "I'm MVL's second." They said, "Oh, okay." Okay, so Paul Keres was a top player for quite a long time. And the reason he was called the second is he came in second when he was supposed to come in first. And at the famous AVRO tournament, which you're all familiar with, he tied for first with Ruben Fine, and he won on tie breaks because he beat Fine 1.5-1/2. And he wanted to play a match for the World Championship with Alekhine, and Alekhine said, "I'm busy drinking, and World War II's happening, so we can't play." Okay, that was a good excuse. So instead, he went to college. Terrible. Okay, and he got a degree in mathematics, I think, then back to chess. And during the Second World War, the truth hurt once again, since he's from Estonia, and they were invaded by the Nazis and the Soviet Union and everybody else. Anybody who could invade Estonia, they're like, they're pretty small, let's invade them. Okay, pretty easy to take them. And it turned out, since he was a top player in the world, he was playing for the Soviet Union. And before that, he had played for Estonia in the Olympiad. And actually, even though the country only has 2 million people or less at that time, very small country, they came in third in one of the Olympiads, with Paul Keres on board one, of course. So, great player. And I have this prop here, which I've shown on the stream. This is a 5-crown note from Estonia, which they don't use anymore. They're on the euro now. But as you can see, the front of the bill, not sure which camera to show. I can show this camera. We got 2 cameras, one for you on Zoom and one for you on YouTube. Anyway, the 5-crown note, that's Paul Keres. He must have been good at chess. They put him on the money. Usually you don't put chess players on money. Not usually. And also in the Soviet Union, many years ago, they put him on a stamp. So he must have been a good chess player. And they talk about his life quite a bit in Wikipedia. It's a very long article. It talks about his matches, his tournament victories, the fact that he never got a chance to play the World Championship because in the candidates tournament that would decide who would play the World Champion, he always came in second. What is he, Phil Mickelson? Terrible. Oh, wait, Mickelson started coming in first after that. Okay, so there's a lot about Soviet occupation, Nazi occupation, Soviet Union. Then they talk about his candidate cycle, where he played in candidates and was always having a very good tournament, but never quite winning. Coming behind Bronstein, coming behind Smyslov, coming behind Tal. And they ranked him, Chessmetrics did, as the best player in the world for 30 years who was not world champion or Korchnoi. So he was ranked 8th. They had 6 world champions ahead of him, Korchnoi, then Keres, for like a 30-year span. 3-time Soviet champion, many times Estonian champion. You can see here he played for the Soviet Union, boards 1, 3, and 4, depending on what year it was. He's won all kinds of medals, obviously. He's a cool-looking guy. That was 4 years before his passing. There's a street named after Keres in Estonia. There's a statue of him. He's on the money there. And now this is something I learned today. I knew a lot about Keres before because, he's a great player. It says over 100,000 attended the state funeral in Tallinn for a chess player. Man. So he was pretty important in Estonia. They talk about the note that I have. Okay, in fact, there's a picture of it there where I'm with my mouse, which I have with me, of course. And he's like elected the greatest sportsman in the century in Estonia in the year 2000. So Estonia doesn't have a lot of famous sports people all around the world, but Keres was known by chess players all around the world. He also wrote many chess books and did a lot of studies. When I was in the Soviet Union in 1984, I was at a chess seminar in Moscow, and the people there told me if Keres got a chess magazine in the mail, he always solved all the puzzles first before he read the magazine. He wanted to solve everything. If he couldn't solve it, he just kept trying. Trying is the first step to solving them. These are some of the books that he wrote here. Great author. He has many, many notable games, many top tournaments. You can see first, second, third, first, in many, many tournaments over a period of 35 years. And he died at the age of 59. He wasn't playing in his 60s and 70s. These are matches he played. He lost a candidates match to Spassky in 1965. Spassky became world champion in 66. So another second. He beat Geller in a match, Unzicker, world champion Irva after Irva was the world champion, but after Alekhine won the rematch, and many other strong players, Idkov, etc. These are his scores against top players in the world. He beat Alekhine, Botvinnik, Bronstein. He has a plus score against Capablanca, plus score against Irva, Rubinstein, -1 against Fischer in 10 games, +1 against Geller, 50% against Karpov. Karpov is the only world champion that he played and did not beat. They played twice and they were draws. Plus score against Korchnoi, 4 wins and 1 loss. Plus score against Larson, 50% against Petrosian, who was world champion for 33 games. So beats Smyslov 8 times. +4 against Tal in 32 games. 8 wins and 4 losses. So you can see how strong he was. And he was also very popular. for chess fans because he had a very aggressive attacking style. Maybe not as crazy as Tall, but super aggressive. And you can see how long his Wikipedia article is with many pictures, tournament results, and all kinds of, you could read it for days, especially if you're a slow reader like me. Then you could read for weeks, even better. Okay, now our sponsor for the lecture wanted me to discuss one game in particular, their favorite Keres game. We're going to discuss another game first, and we'll finish with his game. But if you analyze a lot of Keres games, you'll notice big attacking player and very accurate. Very hard to play against. Probably more accurate than Tall, but not as wild and aggressive. Okay, so we'll share. My mom told me never to share the screen. We'll do a new share. All right. And let's see. Let's go. Well, I don't want that. I want the next one. F11. Okay, can anybody see the chessboard? Nobody's answering. Somebody answer. You can see it perfectly. All right, let me change it so you can't see it. Terrible. Okay, the first game we're going to look at is from the aforementioned candidates match between Keres and Spassky. Now, for a guy who beat 9 world champions in a 45 minutes to 1 hour lecture, I can't show you like 25 of his best games, and probably I could show you 100 fantastic games that he won. So we're going to concentrate on the one recommended by our sponsor, and this candidates match game with Spassky, where he took Spassky out back. And Spassky is a much stronger player than he gets credit for in the West, because the thing that he's most famous for is losing a match, to Bobby Fischer. You're like, oh, Spassky, he's the guy who lost to Fischer. Okay, but before he lost to Fischer, he was world champion for many years. He won matches against Petrosian. He was a top 10 player in the world for 25 years. He was still top 10 in the 70s. And he beat many world champions. And Fischer himself considered Spassky one of the 10 greatest players ever. Probably put Keres somewhere around there also. Okay, now, before it was common, Keres played d4 and e4, just not at the same time. He didn't make 2 moves at once. Some of Keres's greatest games are Sicilian, aggressive attacking games, and some of them he played d4. And that made it harder to prepare for him, because, as we say at the top level, he could play with his right hand or his left hand. And this is with his left hand, d4. And they played a Nimzo Indian. Spassky, a very classical player. And Keres played e3. And Spassky played a line in this particular game that I used to play a lot as a child. I played the Nimzo Indian with black many games in my youth, and I would always feed Keto my queen bishop with black, because the queen bishop doesn't look so good. Okay, not so good. Bishop on c8. So Spassky played b6, bishop b7, and then knight e4. And I've played this with black between the ages of, I would say 11 and 20. If I had black against you and you let me, I would probably have this position. And what a lot of people do in this position who don't want to calculate is they play queen to c2, defending their knight on c3. But Keres was eager to sacrifice material if he thought, number one, it gave him a long initiative, and number two, it was correct. If they had engines back then, Keres would say, what does the engine say? He didn't want to play an incorrect sacrifice and then get lucky. He had a great intuition about what should work and what shouldn't, and that comes with a lot of experience, which obviously he had. And he ignored the knight on c3, and he just castled. And I've had positions like this in my youth, and I never took that pawn. Okay, because when I was young, that was way after games like this. So I knew better than to waste a lot of time in the opening to get a pawn and get my pieces trapped. And this was a candidates match, so you would think Spassky would play his super A game, but he went down the wrong path pretty early. But I'm going to give him a break. It was 1965, so they didn't have the theoretical knowledge that we do now. So, okay, if he did something wrong in the opening, they didn't really know about it then until the game was played and it was analyzed. When I was black in these positions, I would play bishop takes c3 and f5. And I would try to attack on the king side. And since I was a kid and I was rated, between 1,500 and 2,200 for the most part, and my opponents were lower rated than me for the most part, I won a lot of games. I didn't play it against, super grandmasters like these guys. Okay, and Spassky did just that, but he took the pawn on c3. And you can take this pawn based on a very unusual tactic. At first, it looks like it just loses a piece to queen c2. The knight is trapped. Okay, but black actually has a way to get his knight out, which I'm sure both players were familiar with. But I think if Spassky had to do it over again, he wouldn't go into this line. And, well, we don't know, but we could ask him. Spassky's still alive. So for the next lecture, I'll contact Spassky. I'll say, hey, would you play this way again? And he'll say, what? And then I'll say, well, he says no. Okay, Spassky trades on f3 and plays queen g5 check. King h1 is forced. And now queen h5 sets up a perpetual check if you take the knight. Queen takes knight, queen f3, always repeat, and the game would end in a draw. Okay, and in a candidates match, when you're ahead in the match and you have the black pieces, a draw is pretty good. Okay, and Keres doesn't want to draw. He has white. He's trying to win this match. But it's not easy to defend the pawn on f3. If you play bishop e4 or bishop e2, the knight's just going to take it, and that knight's not trapped anymore. You could play king g2, which is also a repetition. Queen g5 check, queen h5, same position. So Keres sacrificed another pawn. Now, did he know this before the game? I don't know. I'm going to say probably. Rook g1. Now he's threatening the knight, and it looks like the knight's going to be trapped after queen takes f3 and rook g2. That's the end of the knight. Black's development isn't too good either. His rooks haven't moved, his knight hasn't moved, his king hasn't moved. Okay, now, turns out white is not winning a piece here because if it was white's turn to move and he takes the knight on c3, black has another perpetual check. So let's play a bad move on purpose. I'm good at that. Okay. Queen takes knight, queen d1 check. Always repeat. The only way to avoid the perpetual is to give everything away. And then black's up a lot of pawns. So this would be terrible for white. So because queen takes c3 doesn't win the game, black has a free move here before he has to save his knight. Can someone in the audience suggest an excellent move here for black that gives the knight an escape square? Anybody? Make sure you unmute yourself first so I can hear you. That's right, very good. f5. Now, if you take the knight, black has the perpetual I just showed you. And if you don't take the knight, black has knight e4, and black's up 2 pawns. However, black's development isn't very good. White has the 2 bishops, and white has the open g-file, so white has great compensation for the 2 pawns. Now again, if Keres thought, no, this is winning for black, I can't be 2 pawns down, he could just take the knight here and go into the repetition. But he played bishop a3, stopping black from castling due to its illegality. And also, his rook is defending the first rank, so now we're threatening queen takes knight on c3. So you got to play knight e4 and save your knight. Black is up 2 pawns, but as Keres correctly understood, he has too much compensation. Now, this is actually quite funny because black's structure here is set up to block white from moving forward in the center. Or so he thought. If we're going to move forward in the center, we can attack the queen. The queen moves away. We play f3 because never play f3 hasn't been invented yet. It was 1965. The knight moves away. Then we play e4, and we keep moving our center pawns, and our 2 bishops become really good. The problem with attacking the queen, let's say bishop e2, is the f pawn isn't defended. Knight f2 check, and black is up 3 pawns, and if black wants to, he can do this perpetual check. Okay, or he could play for a win with his extra 3 pawns. Okay, so Keres can't play bishop e2, so he played rook f1. Now he can play bishop e2. The rook's better on f1 than a1. On a1, it did nothing. Now we're defending the f pawn. Now we're ready to play bishop e2, f3, e4, d5, and then, the start of Donkey Kong. There's no doubt about it. Donkey Kong wins. Okay, Spassky played a move I don't like, but it's not the worst move that he played. He played rook to g8. Not a fan. And Spassky probably thought, when the bishop goes to e2 and kicks my queen won't pin the rook anymore, so I got to stop rook takes g7. Okay, a very poor way of doing it, in my opinion. Bishop e2, f3, d5. d5 is actually better than e4 because we're attacking the pawn on e6, not the pawn on f5, and we're opening up the diagonal for black's bishop if he decides to go to this diagonal, which he does, so it makes him look good. And this is a very, very poor position for black. If black's greedy and doesn't develop his pieces and takes another pawn, here comes bishop c4, and rook g8 looks even worse than it did before. And e4 is coming, and winter is coming. Okay, you can't open up the position for the 2 bishops. So he tried to block the position. So Spassky's next few moves were to block everything up. He played king f7, trying to run away, e4, and now c5, blocking the bishop on a3. Now, to prove that Keres wasn't cheating with an engine, usually 1965 would prove that, he didn't play the engine move here, which is going all the way back to c1, always retreat. The engine likes bishop c1. He played the more human move, the move most of us would consider more likely, bishop to b2, because the bishop on a3 isn't doing anything anymore. The time to go to b2. Now, depending on your rating, your strength, your understanding of chess, how long you've played chess, if you look at this position, some of you will say, black's 2 pawns up. I don't see it. I think black's fine. And then the stronger players will say, what is wrong with Spassky? How could he do this to himself? Okay, any super grandmaster couldn't believe that they would have black here. Black is getting totally destroyed. And you could imagine if white had a pawn on b3 to make the material closer to equal, that wouldn't matter at all. If we're giving white pawns, giving white a pawn on g3, that probably makes this position worse. Take that pawn away, open that g file. Give me the center. Trap pieces over here. King is open. 2 bishops. What else? Okay, and the center can still keep coming. So any super grandmaster would think black is completely lost here. And you can see black captured 2 pawns. Then he kept having to move his pieces back. What's funny is this knight is still here. Knight f6, knight e4, knight c3, knight e4, knight back to f6. Is he going to play knight g8 next? Okay. He played f4, trying to block up the position. e5, attacking the knight, knight h5. Now remember, just because you're attacking doesn't mean your opponent can't have threats either. Black wants to play knight g3 check here. So an incredible blunder would be queen takes h7. Then after knight g3 check, white loses his queen. White doesn't have enough compensation for that. But even if you don't play queen takes h7, black's going to play knight g3 check anyway. So Keres takes time out and says no knight g3, plays really nice king g1, getting off of this pin of the h-pawn. And it defends his rook on f1 a little bit more, a little safer. Now, if it was white's move, I wouldn't blame him for playing queen takes h7. I think I might play that. So Spassky played g6 and said, no, you're not going to play that. Rook g4. This sets up a really nice trap of the black queen, and it also stymies the black knight. If the knight goes to g7, you're losing your f4 pawn with check. And in this position, I mean, Spassky made an incredibly bad move, but the engine says it's time to resign. Black's position is completely ridiculous. But what Spassky did didn't help matters. Played rook d8, and I have no idea why he played rook d8. I can't think of a variation where I would want to play rook d8. I got nothing. Okay, it's an atrocious move, but the position is already way beyond lost. Bishop to d3, threatening to sack on g6, and that sacrifice wins. That sacrifice leads to checkmate, especially with the rook on d8, stopping the black king from escaping. When a world champion or a super grandmaster makes a mistake, they admit it. He's like, all right, rook d8 made no sense, back to g8. That's when you know you have a good position, when your opponent says, uh-oh, that was a dumb move. And now rook to f2, and somebody has to unmute themselves, even in the future on YouTube, and tell me what white is threatening here. And remember, you're always threatening it. If you watch my stream, this is pretty easy. Bishop f1 wins the queen. And black doesn't have any compensation for that. So Spassky chose the easy way out. He resigned. Okay, so he lost pretty quickly, pretty embarrassingly. King's on f7. His queenside pieces haven't moved. He's done a knight's tour with his knight. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 moves with the knight, and the knight's trapping the black queen. The black queen's made a lot of moves also. Okay, so he's moved his queen and his knight. I'm sorry, say it again. Yeah, you can play rook f2 here, also threatening bishop f1. I'm going to show you why this is better. Okay, because in this position, what's the only move black can play to save his queen? Which Spassky would have played last move if Keres had played rook f2 the move before. How do we save our queen? Knight g7. Now, instead of resigning, he could have played knight g7. Okay, very reasonable. That way his queen can escape. Now here, every move wins. You can ask your engine. It says this wins, this wins, this wins. One way to win is bishop e4. Man, that's annoying. I hate when that happens. But the engine says, let's go here. Now, in the previous position, if we play rook f2 here and he plays knight g7, we don't have the sacrifice on g6. The knight on g7 blocks the rook. So maybe Keres saw that and he wanted to play this way. And then if you take, I take with the queen, and the truth is going to hurt very badly. I'll give you a sample variation because I'm a nice guy. I could play d6. I could play rook takes knight. Okay, and this is a ridiculous position for black. Now, this is what's funny. The engine says, instead of resigning, Black should play random legal move and lose his queen to bishop f1. The engine says not playing knight g7 and allowing bishop g6. It's better to let him play this and win your queen. Okay, that's engine thinking for you. That's not how humans think. Humans say, bishop f1, I resign. So they play knight g7. Spassky said, knight g7, I resign. So he just resigned here because he's been getting totally destroyed the whole game, and the extra pawns are useless. So an amazing demolition in a candidates match to determine the world champion against the guy who would later become world champion. Frankly, ridiculous. So brilliant game by Keres, sacrificing one pawn, then another pawn, and then totally rolling Spassky over. Now, let's go to the next game and tell me if you can see it, because, you guys see a board that's set up? Very good. Now, Szabó, as you know, is there somebody here I can whisper to? I don't think they know. Szabó's most famous game, in my opinion doesn't matter, but his most famous game is a game against Reshevsky from Zurich 53. If you have the book on Zurich 53, look at the game Szabó Reshevsky. Because in that game, Szabó had made in two moves with an elementary tactic. Queen g6 check and then mate. And he didn't see it. And he played something else and they drew. And Reshevsky hung the mate in two instead of not hanging it. And then Szabó didn't do it. Szabó also has a famous game where he lost his queenside against Fischer in 60 memorable games. Okay, but this is the most memorable because our sponsor said so. That makes it even more memorable. This is the game from Budapest, 1955. Hungary versus the Soviet Union. Szabó being Hungarian and Keres playing for the Soviet Union. And they played a Sicilian rouser, which I used to be an expert on. Keres is white, and this is exactly how I play with black, although I don't play this way anymore. This game is one of the reasons. Okay, now in this position, I used to play bishop e7 all the time. That's what Szabó did. Now I play a6, and then I play h6, and what I do is terrible, but it's mine. It's my terrible line. You can't have it. It's mine. And I used to play bishop e7, and I would get this position with black all the time. And when I played black, I played the most common move, knight takes d4. And one of the main lines goes like this. And I've actually had this several times. Takes. If you take the knight on f6, then queen takes g5 check. So they play bishop d2, knight d5, and no, not takes. My queen's hanging. And in the 80s and 90s, this was a very common line. This was like the starting position for the line. And white scored a little bit better than black. I've had black in this position 4 or 5 times, but not in the last 20 years. Okay, Szabó did not play the most common move, knight takes d4. Now, he has a good excuse. This was 1955. I can't tell you what the most common move 1955 was. The second most common move, played by Kasparov and Kramnik, but not at the same time, is h6, putting it in h. Is white going to sack a piece with h4, or is white going to retreat his bishop h4? Nobody knows. Okay, Szabó played another move, which nobody plays now. Why does nobody play it now? This is one of the reasons. This game. Okay, and games like this, people said, we got to find another line. And I've never played this move. I didn't even know about it because it was refuted before I was born. That's a good excuse. Szabó played a6. And now white gets a really good position by force. And he starts with e5. Takes on e5, takes on c6. And the problem with this ruined pawn structure for black is if black goes into the endgame ever, his bishop on c8 is simply terrible. But if he doesn't go into the endgame, then he can use the b file and try to attack, which is what Szabó did. So for example, if you take the queen with check, we can't do a counter check. I'd like to. And we get this position. This endgame is considered really good for white because this bishop is so bad. And I have the d6 square for my knight. And my knight can go to a4 and annoy you on like basically all the dark squares. And your bishop is never going to be good. And I have control of the d file and so forth. And you might say, ooh, Mr. Cotter, call on me because you're as old as I am. So you've heard of Mr. Cotter. But black has the d5 square for his knight. Well, temporarily, but when I get my knight in here and I play c4, you don't have that square for your knight. So my knight has c5 and d6, and your knight doesn't. My bishop on d3 is magnificent. Your bishop on c8 is terrible. And you have these two isolated pawns. So grandmasters and engines say this is really bad for black. In my opinion doesn't matter, this is better for black than not trading queens. In my opinion, white's attack is stronger than black's. But black wasn't trying to get a much worse ending. Black played the Sicilian to get a very interesting kind of game. Possibly not the right thing to do against Keres. Possibly. And I want to point something out to you guys. I think like a weak player. Okay, here's how a weak player thinks. Weak player says, this guy, let's say Tal, let's say Keres, let's say Kasparov, those guys are great attacking players. I have to get a really boring position. If it's an attacking game, I'm going to get crushed. Okay? And that's the way a weak player would think. They'd say, well, okay, Kasparov, I got to trade queens and trade everything. And in this instance, I agree with the weak player. That's right. I think grandmasters have too much hubris. And they're like, I play what I play. I know what I know. The Keres ain't better than me. And I think Szabo's like, I play what I play. If Keres plays better than me, he does. But I ain't afraid of him. It's a good attitude not to be afraid of somebody. But I think going into their strong suit isn't a good idea when you have black. Okay, so BC6. Once again, he could trade queens and transpose to that line I showed you, but he decided not to. Knight d7 is a big mistake. If he's not going to trade queens, he should still play knight d5. Okay, knight d7 is not good. And in this position, Keres played the excellent h4, putting in an h. And obviously, you're attacking on the king's side, so h4. And the other reason, instead of just pushing your h-pawn, which could have happened, is he wants to do a rook lift. Okay? So he's got a couple of things going on. Now, you might think that e5 is hanging. You would be wrong. If you take on e5, d8 is not protected enough. There's a bishop on g5, and there's a rook on d1. So this just wins a piece for white. I got a lot of pieces defending my queen on d8. And if you trade bishops, and you open up the h-file from my rook, maybe you shouldn't have done that. And my bishop has the excellent d3 square. Your bishop's no good. Okay, now Szabó wanted to play on the b file. He has the open b file. So he played rook b8. Engine agreed. Rook b8, get that b file. Okay, and Keres played queen e3. And he's stopping queen b6. It doesn't look like he's stopping queen b6. But if you play queen b6, your bishop on e7 is going to be hanging. Now, you could still do this and go into this bad endgame, I think. Queen b6 takes, throw this check in, and then take this. And this is that same terrible ending, except I also have this open h-file. I'm not sure how you defend your h-pawn if I just double rooks on the h-file. Okay, and also my knight has d6. Knight might go to f6 and sack a piece. This bishop is absurd, etc. And again, he doesn't want to trade queens, although maybe he should have. Okay, so he played the move rook e8, defending his bishop, so his queen could go to a5, and also his knight could go to f8 later and defend the king's side. The engine doesn't like it, but it actually makes perfect sense for a human to play rook e8. Rook h3, here comes the rook lift, defends the queen on e3, defends the knight on c3, and the rook can go to g3. Great rook lift. Queen a5, attacking the pawn on e5, or does it? Bishop takes e7, rook takes e7. Now, there's no defense to the back rank, so Keres gains a tempo. That's why he took the bishop on e7. If it's black's turn to move here, you cannot take on e5. If you take with the queen, I trade queens, and my rook goes to d8. If you take with the knight, I sacrifice my queen, and then I play rook d8 check. So because the rook is on e7, which is a very strange square, Keres can keep attacking. Rook g3. Roar. Now, Szabó wants to take that pawn on e5. First of all, it's a pawn, so you want to take it. The other reason is, if he takes with the queen, he's defending the g7 square, and it stops white's attack. So Szabó put his rook back on e8 and said, now I'm going to take on e5. You don't have rook g8 anymore. Okay, now here, Paul Keres did what my friend Wes Berger says is a good, bad move. And he told me the reason I'm good at chess, this is my friend Wes, is because I make good, bad moves. Now, a bad move is like queen b6. It's bad, and there's no reason it could ever be good. That's a bad move. A good bad move is when you make a bad move, but you win immediately because of it. You're not playing an engine. No engines in 1955. If you are an engine nowadays, you play rook e1, defending your pawn on e5, then you continue attacking. Queen g5, bishop d3, h5, and black doesn't really have an attack. If black puts his queen on b4, I could play b3. That's the end of your attack. Your bishop on c8 is a ridiculous piece. Terrible. So the engine just says rook e1, and let's keep attacking. Okay, and I mean, Keres must have been late for a date or something. Keres is like, I ain't waiting that long. I'm going to win now. Okay, he says, in the future, this is going to be somebody's favorite game because of what I do here. Keres was way ahead of his time. He used to know what I would say on my stream 45 years before I streamed. And what would I say? Always sack the exchange. So he took the knight on d7. He said, no, you're never going to take my e5 pawn, and you're never going to attack me. I'm going to attack you, and I don't care about your rooks. My minor pieces are better. I wonder if he said all that. Okay, bishop takes. And the engine says white's doing well here, but it prefers not to sack the exchange. And here, as our sponsor has pointed out, the engine doesn't like the next move of Keres because of a very tricky continuation where black isn't losing anymore. The engine wants to play queen g5. And then after, I assume g6, got to assume something, we can keep attacking on the king side. h5, bishop d3, etc. And we have an attack, and black really doesn't. But Keres played bishop d3. Now, our sponsor, Casey, he was like, the engine says bishop d3 is bad. What do I do with my bishop in the rouser if I can't develop it? Well, what you do with your bishop in the rouser is a general question, and this is a specific position. In a lot of rousers, not this one, but in a lot of them, white very early plays bishop bc4 to b3. And then the bishop is on this nice diagonal, try to break through, and it stops black's queenside play. That's typically where a bishop could go in the rouser, typically. Or in the Velimirovich attack, which is a kind of a Sicilian, kind of a Sozin. Now, bishop d3 is not a terrible move. It takes very unusual play to make use of the fact that this move is inaccurate. And Szabó was not up to the task. Yeah, Szabó played a bad move here. The move is very tricky. The engine wants Szabó to play rook b4. That's not a very human move. Not very human. And I don't know if it wants to take on h4 or wants to double rooks on the b file. And after rook here, it actually wants to play rook takes b2 next, but I forgot what white's move was. It might have been, was it h5? No, I don't think it was h5. It wasn't queen g5, because then I can't play rook takes b2. I guarantee it. After rook b4, the engine claims black is not losing. Although, you know, this bishop on d7 is rather pathetic. Pretty pathetic. White's pieces are all attacking. White has knight e4 to f6, knight e4 to d6, h5, h6, queen g5. How could you not like white? And so bishop d3 is inaccurate because the engine says so. In 1955, the engine didn't say nothing. He played h6, which is a tricky move, but this turns out to be a mistake. The idea of h6 is to tempt white into playing queen takes h6, which is a mistake because now I play queen takes e5, defending g7, attacking your rook, queen e1 check isn't bad, and then this didn't go anywhere for white. Okay, he was hoping that would happen, that he would play queen h6, queen e5. And he said, if he doesn't play queen h6, then what am I worried about? He's got nothing. Okay, and white played queen f4, and this is an excellent move. It's a creeping move, a favorite of Anatoly Karpov, moving your queen one square at a time, creeping up the board, recommended not only by Radiohead, but by Stone Temple Pilots. Yeah, and don't forget it. Okay, you can look that joke up later. You'll figure it out. Now here the engine says black is lost, but even engines want to get a spite check. It wants black to play queen c5 and then check him. And then it says white's winning, but at least it got a check in. Pretty good, pretty good. Okay, now he's obviously afraid of queen f6. I can't argue with him. So he played king f8. And when Szabó played h6, he probably expected this and said, what's the problem? What am I worried about? If the guy tries to bring another piece into the attack, knight e4, bam, instant counterattack. Checkmate. And here, Keres played a brilliant move, which he must have seen when he sacrificed the exchange. Otherwise, it's hard to see why he would do this. Again, if you play the sort of obvious move, queen g4, looks like it's unstoppable, the attack, queen takes e5 again. That's always the saving move. And that's why Keres sacrificed the exchange. Because that was his only weak point, and he got rid of that black knight. Also, the black knight could have gone to f8 later, defending the king side. So he didn't really need his rook on d1 for attack, but he thought black needed his knight on d7. And now he crashed through rook takes g7. And Keres was an amazing calculator, sort of like Tal. We're threatening queen takes f7 mate. And many other moves would win also. Rook f7, queen h6, everything wins. So you have to take the rook, queen f6 check. Now the game ended immediately instead of slowly. But Szabó was correct. That actually reminds me of what Spassky did. Spassky lost immediately instead of playing on in a hopeless position. Okay, he played king f8, and the engine goes, boo, boo. Okay, the engine says, that's terrible. Now the engine is already announcing mate, but king f8 is mate in 3, and king g8 is mate in 15. So king g8's better. But king g8 is easy to see why it loses. We play queen h6, and we're threatening the old bishop check, bishop g6 check, mate theme. For example, queen takes e5, bishop g6 check, queen takes f7 mate. Okay, so black has to stop that. Black has to stop bishop h7, bishop g6, and that mate I just showed you. Well, problem with rook e7, which does defend the F pawn, it gets rid of the escape square. Oops. Now, if you have more ways to defend F8, F7, I'm happy to hear them. You play rook F8 and get mated at 1. Also good. So the engine says F5 is the best move. Now, it turns out this would have saved the game because the en passant rule didn't exist in 1955, but the players didn't know that. That joke even confuses me. Now, obviously, en passant existed. Now we're threatening every legal move is mate. If you have white and you can't find a mate here, you're not trying. Queen G7 mate, bishop H7 leads to mate, queen H7 leads to mate, queen G6 leads to mate. This is a really nice bishop. I'd like to point that out. Terrible bishop. Boo. And the engine here plays queen F5, giving the queen away, but stopping mate temporarily. Very temporarily. Wait, queen F5 hangs mate in 1. Oh, I'm sorry. It plays rook E7. I apologize. And then it plays queen F5. That's the engine play for black. Terrible. So you can see why Szabó didn't want to do that. He's like, if that's best play, I'll just play king F8. And now the game ended in a draw. Queen H8, queen F6, perpetual. Except for one thing. It didn't end in a draw. White played the very simple bishop G6, threatening queen F7 mate. Queen F7 mate is easy to stop. You can resign. And then the guy won't be able to do it because you resigned. So the game's over. That's one way to stop queen F7 mate. And that's what Szabó did. The other way to stop queen F7 mate is rook E7 and then mate. Now, black got no attack that game. White had all the fun. And that was a match between two countries, Soviet Union and Hungary. So they were expecting more from their top Hungarian player. I was expecting more too, to be honest with you. And after that game, people stopped playing A6 in the Sicilian in that exact position, which I actually want to go back to. Okay, in this position, nobody plays A6 now. You won't find any super grandmaster games. In fact, you'll find very few games in this position. But if you find them, knight takes D4 or H6. Nobody's playing A6 and getting crushed the way Szabó got crushed this game. This was no fun for black. Imagine you had black this game. He didn't make any threats. Nothing. There was not one time where white said, oh no, here comes black's attack. White just had all the fun that game. Keres was a great attacking player, sacrificed a lot, and was very accurate. Tough guy to play against. You don't beat 9 world champions because you're lucky. 7, maybe. 8, probably. Not 9. You beat 9 world champions, you're pretty good. And I encourage you all to look at some more of Keres's greatest chess games. He has many. There's books written about him. There's memorial tournaments to him all over the world. He was also a real nice guy, which is really unusual at that level. Everybody liked Keres. And according to Reuben Fine, very suspicious, he said, oh, no, I'm sorry, not Reuben Fine, Reshevsky. I apologize. Reshevsky said, Keres will never become world champion. He's too nice a guy. You have to want to kill your opponents. Rawr! They said he's too much of a person. What an insult. He's never been so insulted being called a person. So Keres was a great guy. Everybody loved him. He was the best player in Estonia forever. And unfortunately, for most of his life, it wasn't called Estonia. So the truth hurts. But still, the Soviet Union encompassing all that space, all those people, all those territories, he was still on the Soviet team every year. That wasn't easy. Sometimes the Soviet team was 5 world champions. So being on the Soviet team was hard to get on that team. That was a tough team. I hope you enjoyed that lecture. And if you're ever in Estonia, you can look for this. And they're going to say, we have heroes, dude. We don't have Keres anymore. But you can find statues and streets named after him. This is Grandmaster Ben Feingold. Once again, I want to thank our sponsor, Casey. Without him, this lecture couldn't be possible. If you want to sponsor a lecture, contact Karen. Go, Karen. And I'll see you guys next time with another great player of the past. Bye, everybody.